I'm Alex Bross,
I'm Nicholas Lowe.
and this is our multimedia presentation on the effect of social media on the Arab Spring.
First, we have a question for the audience.
What exactly was the Arab Spring?
One source defines it as a revolutionary wave of protests and demonstrations in northern Africa and the Middle East.
How many countries do you think were involved in the Arab Spring?
There were about 16 different nations involved.
And these questions are important because many people do not know what exactly the Arab Spring was or how large of a revolution it was to the world. How violent do you think this became in certain areas?
Well, in some nations, this developed into a full-out civil war, police brutality, shootings, and beatings.
What is your estimate on the death toll?
Some sources estimate about between 60,000 to 70,000 deaths.
And these two questions are also important for the audience to know because it shows that the Arab Spring is a lot larger than they had previously known.
The Arab Spring spread all across northern Africa and the Middle East regions.
This map shows many different nations in color code to show that some nations were in civil war, some had their governments overthrown, and some had just merely minor protests. Not all nations involved in the Arab Spring had their governments overthrown or people killed, and some nations even outside the Arab world also protested. But why now? They had all these nations had problems with dictatorships or absolute monarchies.
The human rights were being violated. There was government corruption. Economic crisis, unemployment, and poverty were also main factors.
But with all these factors, these factors have been in effect for a long time. But why would these people decide to act now and rise up now and revolt? What was the catalyst? The catalyst was the actions of a street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia, who on December 13th, 2010, lit himself on fire because he was constantly being harassed and humiliated in public by police officials.
But why self-immolation? What was the effect of this?
The mother of Mohamed Bouazizi said, "My son set himself on fire for dignity." His sister said that in Tunisia, dignity is more important than bread. He did he lit himself on fire because in the Arab world, self-respect and his dignity is so important, and self-immolation is actually not that rare of a way to protest things that you need to stand up against in public to spread awareness of.
Following the arrows in the picture shows mass protests in order, starting in Tunisia, then in Cairo, Yemen, Bahrain, Libya, and then the mass demonstrations in Syria. As you can see from these pictures, that the protests of the Arab Spring were massive.
Social media. What was social media?
Well, it is a web-based and mobile technologies used to turn communication into interactive dialogue.
What are some examples of social media?
Some examples are Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, text, emails, and the news.
Why use social media?
That can be used to organize resistance, communicate with leaders and populace, and to raise awareness of the government corruption.
It can be used to spread the revolutionary ideas,
or go against the government's attempts at censorship and internet restrictions.
This is the main reason why social media was used, because it was their only means of conveying their revolutionary ideas and spreading the ideas of the Arab Spring.
A quote by a protester from the Arab Spring: "We use Facebook to schedule the protest, Twitter to coordinate, and YouTube to tell the world."
A writer from Time magazine wrote that technology mattered, but this was not a technological revolution. Social networks did not cause these movements, but they kept them alive and connected. Technology allowed us to watch and spread the virus of protest, but this was not a wired revolution. It was a human one of hearts and minds, the oldest technology of all. Was social media the cause of the Arab Spring?
No, it did not replace other forms of communication, but it accelerated the cause and kept the movements alive and connected.
This is another thing people who study the Arab or don't know anything about the Arab Spring also believe, is that social media was the cause, and it was not. How important was social media?
Many Middle Eastern countries relied heavily on the internet, especially Tunisia and Egypt, but social media was not the reason why these people protested.
In relation to Middle Eastern countries such as Tunisia and Egypt, there was less of a reliance on social media in Libya and Yemen. What was the aftermath?
After 2 months of the Arab Spring in Tunisia, the government was overthrown, President Ben Ali fled Saudi Arabia, and the Constituent Assembly formed.
In Egypt, the government was overthrown after only 1 month of revolting. The leader Hosni Mubarak was put on trial for killing protesters, and the whole top tier of the government resigned.
After a year of protests in Yemen, President Saleh signed power over, but the government was still overthrown later.
In Bahrain, the revolts are still ongoing. There's been little governmental changes, and economic concessions have been given out by King Hamad. However, it's not enough to appease the revolutionaries.
After 7 months of civil war in Libya, the government was overthrown and Muammar Gaddafi was killed by the NDC, the opposition.
In Syria, the protests are also still ongoing. There's been resignations in the government, changes in government policy, formation of militia groups. However, nothing has really changed in Syria, and Syria has the highest death count of all the nations involved. This is a picture of a Facebook page by for Khaled Said, who is a man who was beaten to death by police, and a group formed a Facebook page to spread revolutionary ideas and protest against the police.
And this is a Twitter account of someone who saw the Arab Spring firsthand.
So overall, social media was an accelerant of the Arab Spring, but it did not cause it like most people believe.